The understanding most people have of the Jedi and the Sith is that the Jedi are this collectivistic organization that discourages individuality. Individual personalities are subsumed into the greater good. Affection, love, any real emotion is repressed, and they're forced to live these kind of deprived lives, lives of deprivation and solitude. And that's kind of the popular perception of the Jedi. The Sith, on the other hand, are viewed as fierce individualists, people who are able to follow their passions, people who are able to take what they want, people who are truly able to be free. The truth of the matter is, and I will prove in a moment, that the Sith have much less freedom than the Jedi do. They have much fewer choices in how they live their lives. Their emotional range is even more stunted and restricted than those of the Jedi. In fact, the Jedi appear to be free when you compare it to how most Sith live their lives. It's very ironic. So before we get into that, what do I kind of see as the parallel for the Sith? To me, the Sith kind of remind me of this thing that came out of the Enlightenment and that persists to this day. This idea that civilization's fundamentally a bad thing and that it corrupted man. And this is something we can see in Rousseau with the whole noble savage thing. The idea that when man was free, when there was no laws, there was no private property, there was no state, there was no society, then things were just great. People obeyed a natural law, or it's kind of this utopian time people fantasize about. And you can see this in modern science, or not modern science, but in modern political thought, where they'll talk about, I think an example of this is when some atheist philosophers will go, well, religion is a product of civilization. I don't know, religion became increasingly complex and increasingly descriptive and sophisticated as civilization developed. So natural man didn't have a developed theology. So the implication there is that it was superstition, in their view, is the product of civilization. So if you go back to man before civilization, then he wouldn't be superstitious. Or the idea that communists have that private property and the existence of the institution of the market, money, and personal property is what makes men evil. Money is the root of all evil. Property is the root of all evil. It's an oppression of the bourgeoisie. I mean, most people have this mythical time before something existed in which everything was great. And we on the right are no exception. We think a lot of people just think everything was good during the Middle Ages, and the Dark Ages thing is nonsense. There's all kinds of crimes that have happened throughout history. It's not as if, degeneracy just started in 1960 and it didn't exist before then. It's not like everybody prior to that were pious Christians living happy family lives. And I think it's just very common. And another one that's come up a lot is the whole bonobo thing, where it's like bonobos are a matriarchal society where all the bonobos just fuck each other. And the scientists are like, well, that's because humans are similar to bonobos, and the bonobos don't have war, although I think they do actually eat each other, but whatever, like the bonobos are peaceful, so humans should be like bonobos. And if we just went back to living like them, then things would just work out somehow. And the truth of the matter is, and this is kind of something that, in particular, when you get into real ANCAPs and anarchists, if the state didn't exist, if society didn't exist, we would just create it. I mean, it's just natural to have laws. It's natural to have a state, a government, even if the state is only in a tribe, a council of elders. You need someone who can arbitrate conflicts, someone who can enforce contracts and private property, someone who can ensure general security and welfare. I mean, these things are all just natural. And to a large extent, these things do provide a measure of freedom. I remember G.K. Chesterton talked about this. He said, okay, in which case are you freer? Okay, you got a bunch of kids who are playing on a cliff and there's no fence, are those kids really going to be free to play around? Or if there's like a nice sturdy fence, the kids will be free to play around however much they want. There's a balance between anarchy and like totalitarianism, and where there's the most freedom. And if you go entirely into anarchy, then the ability of the individual to make something of themselves, the ability of the individual to act, is just severely hampered. And you, despite having theoretically more freedom, you really have less. So now I'm done rambling. Let's get into the Sith Code, and you'll see what that whole speech was about. So the Sith Code, I actually love. It sounds awesome. And it's the inverse of the Jedi Code. So this is the Sith philosophy at its most basic. This is much like the Jedi Code is supposed to represent everything the Jedi stand for. The Sith Code is the mission statement. They remind me a lot of the Apostles' and Nicene Creed, and I'm assuming that's what they're based on. They're supposed to be a short statement of belief. So the first line, peace is a lie, there is only passion. Now, this is the first of the ironies we're going to go through. The Sith like to say, well, the Jedi are emotionless. They can't feel. We have the freedom to feel. We have the freedom to pursue our passions. In practice, what does passion mean for a Sith? It means hate and anger and maybe fear, and that's about it. In practice, Sith have a much more restricted emotional range than Jedi. Because the dark side is fueled primarily by hate and anger, those are really the only emotions they can allow themselves to feel. Kindness, love, affection, contentment, happiness. All of these things, what you generally consider positive emotions, they can't allow themselves to feel because those are light side emotions. Their passion is largely restricted to ambition, anger, hate, and fear, as those are the only things that fuel the dark side, and it's the only things that they can permit themselves if they mean to survive within the Sith hierarchy. And we'll talk about that a bit more in a minute, but essentially how every Sith society has been is everybody is constantly trying to kill each other. It's extremely social Darwinist because there's no restrictions whatsoever on the individual. And within kind of the context of how they operate, the only emotions that they can permit themselves to get stronger are anger, hate, and fear. They're constantly plotting, backstabbing each other, and trying to overthrow each other. So there is no peace because their inability to control or balance their emotions means that there's no peace. There's only passion. And once again, people are like, oh, it's passion. That means like, what by passion they think, oh, the Jedi can't get married, they can't have families, they can't feel, that kind of thing. And that's not what the Sith mean by passion. The Sith mean, generally in practice, just blind rage. And that's, if you go through Sith after Sith after Sith, that's pretty much all that they can feel. Through passion, I gain strength. So through passion, you gain strength. So what does that mean exactly? That is, I think, a statement on the dark side. Through their passion that directly fuels the power of the dark side. But it's also kind of a more, I guess, philosophical statement. Because their only passions are really, the only goal of a Sith's life is to gain power, to rise up, to become the best. Their passion is entirely focused on gaining strength. It's kind of interesting in SWTOR, I forget his name, but there's one pureblood Sith you come across who says, my passion is honor and my vice is duty or something. And he's like an honorable man. And the Jedi is just like, you can't be a Sith and be honorable. You aren't free to choose your passion. You can't say my passion is helping people. My passion is not in gaining power. Maybe it's in artwork. Maybe it's in, I don't know, making money. Just anything other than the raw pursuit of power. So through their passion, they do gain strength because that's the only purpose and goal of their lives. And if you look at how the old Sith Empire worked, it functioned in spite of the Sith. Broadly speaking, in SWTOR at least, the Sith Empire is in a constant state of civil war. I forget what it's called, but there's a thing in the Sith Empire where one Sith Lord and his entire power base fight another Sith Lord and his entire power base, and entire navies, entire fleets, entire armies will destroy each other. And this just constantly happens. And the government of the Empire is theoretically made up of Sith Lords. And the Sith Lords have no administrative training. They don't have the temperament for it. So basically, they just run around fighting each other, blowing stuff up and backstabbing each other to try to get power. And in practice, the government only functions because they are interested in governing enough to mess things up. And the non-force users basically just do everything. So through passion, they gain strength, but it's kind of pointless. Through strength, I gain power. Power is kind of seen as an end in and of itself on the dark side. It's kind of often been a debate between, I guess, kind of some of the more pragmatic Sith and some of the more radical Sith as to what the purpose of power is. Darth Krayt and Lord Khan took the view that power is the means to an end. Both of them viewed the goal of the Sith viewed the Sith as being the strongest and most capable of ruling the galaxy, and viewing power as a means to an end, because through their power they could reorganize the galaxy and make it united, to make it stronger. So they did have some concept that power needs to serve a higher purpose, whereas some Sith like Bane and Bitchute viewed power as being merely for its own sake. That to gain power, you didn't have to use it for anything other than gaining more power. It was essentially the end of the line. So that was kind of a continual philosophical divide. But power was, in effect, the only thing that Sith actively pursued. So once again, we have this picture of what the Sith life is like. The Sith, basically, as soon as they are taken into Korriban or wherever they're trained, the apprentices are immediately told to compete against each other. They're encouraged to kill one another if they can. And so they immediately have to become extremely paranoid and fearful. They ironically, their freedom is extremely restricted. They can't wander the halls by themselves. They have to lock themselves in their room. They have to constantly be on guard and weigh every movement as to whether or not they're going to get jumped by other academy students. They live in a state of constant terror, and the terror doesn't change once they graduate. Then they become the apprentice of a Sith Lord, and when they're the apprentice to a Sith Lord, the Sith Lord can kill them at any time for a reason or for no reason at all if they're just bored. And the Sith has to do absolutely everything their master says and just bow to them. And if they're lucky, they might get to survive to adulthood. And then their goal is to kill their master. And once they've killed their master, they have to continue to try to climb the structure of power. And as they're climbing, once again, they can't have personal friends because they're all 100% driven by ambition and hate. So they can't have friendships or any interpersonal relationships whatsoever. They have to spend all their time backstabbing other Sith and getting more powerful. So they don't have time for hobbies or really any enjoyment in life. Once again, going back to power, to passion, they don't have any passions. That's the irony. They have this extremely regimented, restrictive life that only focuses on things that are directly relevant to survival in fighting other Sith. Jedi have a lot of things that are available. Jedi can be doctors, they can be librarians, they can be scientists. Some Jedi stay in the temple and teach other ones. Some of them are diplomats. Some of them are stationed on other worlds. Sure, they all kind of have a common life, but they're allowed to have friends. There's a sense of community, of brotherhood. They can interact with people and not try to kill one another. Even though they're not allowed to get married and fall in love, the Sith effectively aren't either. And I mean, the Sith Order does permit marriage, but in practice, I find a lot of the great Sith Lords were perpetual virgins. Like Palpatine was completely asexual as far as we can determine. Bane was heterosexual, but he viewed intimacy with with another being as being an act of weakness and emotional closeness. I'm not sure how Zana worked exactly, but she was functionally asexual, although she might have slept with someone just for power or to manipulate them. And that's really the only time the Sith would do something like that, because they view any kind of passion not directly related to war as being indulgence. So yeah, so through strength I gain power, through power I gain victory. So you gain victory, but to what end? What is the purpose of your victory? You defeat your master, you may even reach the top of the heap, and then someone else will just kill you. And that's kind of the function of the Sith, is they could get a victory, they didn't really know what to do with it. A general lack of purpose to their order is an issue that is kind of one of the most prevalent issues, because in general Sith are stronger than Jedi. Most of the strongest characters in the Star Wars universe are Sith Lords. There's normally only one Dark Lord of the Sith, and that Dark Lord of the Sith can fight any number of Jedi Masters. Bane killed like 4, I think. Palpatine took down like 3 of them in like 5 seconds. And he only lost against Mace Windu because Mace Windu is like has like special snowflake powers that are really good against Darksiders, and that's really the only reason, with his ability to channel dark side energy. But in general, the Sith are Count Dooku could wipe the floor with any number of Jedi Knights. Darksiders are stronger. And yeah, so through power I gain victory. Through victory, my chains are broken. Now, once again, this is an irony, because the dark side doesn't break your chains. The dark side, the Force shall set me free. It doesn't break your chains. The idea is it's kind of twofold, the idea that your chains are broken. On one hand, there's kind of the physical chains. There's the restrictions on what you can do. You don't have the will to do something. You're restricted by laws. You're restricted by society. Those things are broken, and you can do whatever you want. It also represents the breaking of your morality, the breaking of your compassion, the breaking of those aspects of your personality that hold you back and restrict you. One of the reasons why Palpatine was the strongest Sith of all time was because he was born a complete sociopath, and he had none of the natural most Sith, even like the most crazy ones, had some sort of moral core somewhere in there that limited what they could do, both in terms of how deep they could immerse themselves in the dark side. The irony, though, is the dark side rapidly destroys your sanity. The more power you gain in the dark side, the more rapidly it degenerates your body and your mind. So it sets you free, it lets you go, but at the same time it destroys your agency, it destroys your ability to reason. It in essence enslaves you in a way more totally and more completely than the most restrictive government can. It completely and utterly destroys your mind. And that's kind of the irony of the Sith philosophy and the Sith Code. Much like anarchism, much like primitivism, much like these people who think if civilization was to fall apart, we'd all be free and things would work out. For real freedom, you need law and order. You need structure. You need defined rules and boundaries. You need government. You need to give up a fraction of, I think this was what the social contract was, you need to give up a small amount of your absolute freedom in order, theoretical absolute freedom, to obtain real freedom. And that's something the Sith never understood, nor ever will. And that's one of the many reasons why they continue to lose, and why their entire ideology is so damn ironic. So I hope you enjoyed that. More to come. Talk to you later.